Alien, Predator, sci-fi's baddest boys together at last with a little time to kill. You're a predator on a planet infested with aliens. You've got high-tech weapons, they've got mutant guardians with special powers, and the big mean queen that'll kill to protect her eggs. 10 awesome levels. You hunt with the moves, the spears, discs, lasers, and invisibility powers, but they keep coming with acid fangs and claws. You're a hunter-predator. You came to fight. You came for the action. You came for the aliens.
Time to hunt.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
After Purge, you went on to do your first AVP series, Eternal,
Yes.
often considered to be one of the best that the AVP concept has to offer.
Thank you.
But it does something that the movies are heavily criticised for, and that's setting the story on Earth. How do you think Eternal succeeded there, where the movies failed? Did the setting actually offer you much difficulty while writing this?
I tried to give it a bit of a cyberpunky edge, so it was kind of like slightly in the future as opposed to present day, although we never mention it, but it's the whole idea, it's like 25 years in the future kind of thing, and the way technology is. And I tried to focus again on like character and the motivation and things, as opposed to bringing things in that would date it. Dark Horse were very amiable to kind of like, setting it in present day. I said, a lot of what we'll see will be, there's going to be lots of fights and there's going to be labs and things, so we're not exactly going to see tons of stuff. And I tried to set it in the Far East as well, so it was like a different urban zone kind of thing, unlike LA in Predator 2 and things like that. So yeah, I tried not to make it too mundane and day to day. So even the present day world, as was in that issue, that series, still looked quite appealing. I've been reading a lot of William Gibson and Neil Stephenson at the time, and Pat Cadigan and things like that, so it seeped in.
According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, Aliens vs. Predator, Eternal #1, was released on June 24th, 1998, with 4 unanimous sources. The Dark Horse website further supports the date, and their solicitation copy reads, "In an opulent city of the future, a mysterious techno-baron controls the fate of the world. But even with his vast riches and power, the black-clad figure, known as Nor, cannot stop the hand of death. Or can he? His thoughts are consumed by his latest discovery, a crash-landed Predator ship. It's his belief that Predators hold the key to eternal life. But even if he stands before the answers he seeks, is he willing to go through the Predator's deadly alien cargo to get it?" Writer Ian Edginton, artist Alex Maleev, cover artist Glenn Fabry. Format full color, 24 pages, price $2.50. This is your first time reading Aliens vs. Predator Eternal. What were your thoughts on this thing?
I thought it was an interesting story. I thought the bad guy was actually good. Not good in a moral way, but good as a bad guy, effective.
The opening splash page looks good. All the stuff that takes place whenever this is supposed to be taking place. This is another problem I'm having, is we're seeing him in the past. He's a con man who's gotten a bunch of people killed, and he's about to get killed. He's dying from injuries from having townspeople come after him for him selling snake oil, essentially. And then there's a downed Predator craft, which he follows. He finds the Predators that were already dead. He eats one of their hearts. That's how he gains immortality. But it looks like it's some sort of feudal period, Japanese feudal period. But Japanese were in a feudal period until what, like the 19th century or something? So I'm not sure when it's supposed to take place. And I'm several issues into the miniseries before I can even figure out when it's supposed to be happening. Because I'm not sure, is it taking place in the aliens future in the time of like Ripley and stuff? Or is it taking place in modern times, like most of the Predator stuff? And it's just hundreds of years backward in time that this dude gets his start. And then eventually, through context clues, I realized this is probably happening around today. Like it's a 1998 miniseries, but it's probably happening around 2025 or so, because she talks about a stock market crash in 2019 where that it plummeted the Japanese economy. It's worth noting the lead character in this miniseries is a British woman, but most of the action takes place in Africa and in Japan. And they're definitely pitching Blade Runner at you in this miniseries as well.
Oh yeah. In fact, I was making a list of the movies that it seemed like they were trying to imitate. So Blade Runner was in there, going through my notes here. Salvador was in there, if you remember that from the 80s with James Woods. They're trying to create this world-weary reporter character, The Killing Fields, Apocalypse Now, and Indiana Jones. So at least Harrison Ford gets a couple notes.
But it is funny that you've got the lead is the reporter, the female reporter, and she can't just be a jaded reporter type, a James Woods type. She's got to be running around in the first issue in a bra and short shorts. And in the second issue, they mentioned that she'd done a penthouse spread. So she's a sex bomb on top of being a world weary reporter. It's just a lot. And again, it's very 90s. You know, I can have it all. I'm like, what is the nuclear scientist from the James Bond movie, Christmas Jones? Right. She very Christmas Jones here.
Absolutely. And they're trying to make her so international and edgy. Opening splash page of one of the, I think the second comic, she mentions the transsexuals in the next room listening to Siberian metal and her Iranian cigarettes and all this. And I'm just like, I get it. You're well-traveled. You've seen a lot of seedy things. I like characters like this, but you're telling me more than you're showing me, and you're laying it on really thick.
Well, it's not enough that she's a international porn model, journalist, spy, all this other kind of stuff. But she's also got to be Hunter Thompson. And it just so happened that Transmetropolitan started the year before this. And the Spider Jerusalem vibes she's putting out is also thick. Molasses thick, choking on it thick,
Yeah, so that's two things I got to add to my list. I might need a new index card. Yeah. But before we leave the opening sequence too much, I really like Lee Yat-sen and as a character, and more than you do, I think, because when they first show him, this is a real guy to me. He is a con man, small-time operator who is surviving by his wits. He's got a Chinese name in what, like you said, looks a lot like Japan. But, that's possible. There was travel back and forth even hundreds of years ago.
Well, I think it's worth noting that we are introduced to him under one name, and in the modern times, he's doing a variation, not the same name. So he's another person who's probably well-traveled, at least if not initially in the region, then probably beyond that, since he's a global, he's kind of I don't remember the name of the guy who runs the replicant farms in Blade Runner, but he's basically that guy. So everybody in the world knows him by this point, but I'm sure he made himself a big deal in Asia, where throughout Asia before he moved into the greater world, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's just kind of the perfect opportunist. I don't want to say subhuman or anything. I don't want to call him dehumanizing, but he's basically an animal, if that makes sense. However I can survive best, and not so much immoral as amoral. He's an interesting cat.
He's very Randian, let's be honest. He's like, he has lived for 700 years. He's the one person that we know of that has done things like that, and therefore he has a greater perspective because he's got all that time, and he was already a person who was motivated by self-interest without regard for the impact that kind of other people. His origin sequence is he just killed 17 people, giving them like fermented urine and such as a healing tool. So he doesn't care about other people. He's not going to suddenly grow a moral conscience just because he's long-lived. If anything, he's less likely to be concerned about people whose lives are a blip compared to him.
Yeah, 100%. He was a self-interested slime ball from the very beginning, and now he's just one with a lot of history to him.
And it goes right to the beginning. Not only do you have that confirmed in that origin sequence, but then later on when he sends his team of mercenaries who are equipped with stealth armor that presumably was harvested from Predator technology, so it allows human beings to run around being invisible. He starts a civil war, reignites a civil war in an African country, which, by the way, you would know better than I, but I did a little research. This is like one of the African countries that doesn't have any sort of genocides or massive internecine conflicts between tribes or anything like that. So it's like, okay, great. We've got one of the African nations that's actually kind of stable, fairly all right. So we're going to demonize them and have them have their own horrible backstory in the near future. But he's willing to reignite the civil war in this country, Gambia, just to attract predators so that he can have them to harvest.
So I think they took the name Gambia, they added an I to it and made it Gamibia. That could have been a typo.
Oh, I missed that part. Okay, I was actually looking at it under the proper name.
Yeah, so I think they, this sounds African. Let me create another country that better fits the stereotype than, Gambia or Botswana or things where there are a few countries where things just aren't that screwed up. But no, we don't want that. We want them to have a history of being screwed up so that we can make this. But there's also a point in the past where things were better. So we have this Prince Laurent coming, and he's going to save the day, and our bad guy sends in his mercenaries to ruin that. Honestly, a lot of it is ugly. And what I mean is Alex Maleev is clearly a talented artist, and I've enjoyed a lot of other things he's done. But you take a guy who automatically makes things look gritty and grimy, and then you have him do Aliens and Predators and War Zones, and it just pushed things a little bit over the top for me on the visuals and made it slightly unpleasant. There were things I liked about it, but it's not a comic I'm going to reread a bunch of times.
Yeah, this was my first time too, and I'm sorry that you seem to be stuck being my Ian Edginton guy, because I had limited exposure to his writing, and most of it has been related to Aliens and or Predator stuff, and I've not really enjoyed very much of it. And because without you, I did Aliens Rogue, and Aliens Rogue was remarkably similar to Aliens Labyrinth. Labyrinth is one that a lot of people really enjoy. I really enjoyed that one as well, and Rogue was very, very similar to it, but it came out pretty much the same time. So I'm not saying that anybody ripped anybody else off or anything like that. It just happened to come out around the same time as the exact same miniseries with slight variations, and it was the less good version. And at the time, I incorporated it into like one of my omnibus episodes where I was covering a bunch of different things. I think it's one of the only Aliens miniseries where it didn't get its own podcast. It kind of got stuffed into a bulk podcast. And in the past, I felt bad about that. I felt like I'd given it short shrift. But after having read multiple other Ian Edginton things and knowing that he's the guy they're going to hand the kingdom over to, keys of the kingdom over to when it comes to Xenogenesis, which is the big event thing that's essentially going to end Dark Horse's Aliens and Predator comic books for 10 years. It's like, well, yeah, I can kind of see if that's the guy. It's like when you gave Simon Kinberg the keys to the X-Men, or like whoever ran the Star Trek around. It's like this is not the guy, but this is the guy they chose. And I'm hating this stuff because to me it feels like a marketing guy doing the scripts. Everything I've read from him related to this franchise has been a big, dumb, toyetic idea that they build a miniseries around. It's like, oh, they have an aliens queen. What if they had a king? And then they do a miniseries about that. Oh, aliens can become rhinoceroses and scorpions and stuff. Why don't we make them Batman rogues? And now this one is, what if we did Aliens versus Predator versus Highlander? I don't need Vandal Savage in my miniseries here. And really, like, the Aliens and the Predators are almost an afterthought. It's really about the corporate intrigue and what Vandal Savage is doing. And I don't appreciate it. I don't appreciate that. I feel like the franchise at this point, they've lost faith in it, and they're letting it get hijacked by a version of another franchise with the serial numbers handed off.
Okay, well, we're in a weird space where you're the Aliens and Predators guy. I'm a little bit more positive on this than you are, but that might be just because you've seen a lot better stuff.
I'm just jaded. Like, one of the things that's nice about getting somebody to come in with fresh eyes is you can look at this one miniseries without that broader context and say, okay, how did I enjoy this book? And that's part of why it's good to have guests on shows like this, because sometimes you need a perspective. Me, I'm coming at this, I'm almost 50 episodes into this show. I don't know how many miniseries, specials, short stories I've done with these properties now. I am thoroughly jaded, thoroughly burnt out. I'm intent on finishing the original Dark Horse run of Aliens comic books, which is going to take me to near episode 60. You're coming in, like you're enlisted, and you're like, okay, I'm coming in, I'm going to fight these guys, we're going to win this war, and yah rah rah. And I'm on the other end of it, where I'm short, I'm ready to go home. I've lost all my idealism. I've lost any faith that this is ever going to work out and turn to the good. I just want it over with. So I want people to have different perspectives, and having somebody else come in here and not be as jaded and bitter as I am is exactly why we have guests on the show.
All right, cool. Well, you're talking my language. All right. I have to ask, so with the Rogue miniseries, was there somebody in that who was using alien or predator flesh or technology or something to keep themselves alive for hundreds of years?
Not that specific thing. That's okay. I think that's specific to this miniseries. Although it's funny because they reference the Japanese shogun or samurai or something who ate the heart of one of the alien predators and lived for 200 years. And at first I thought, this must be the guy from that one Dark Horse Comics 2-part serial, but apparently it wasn't. So this was another guy who that happened with. For starters, given how many of these battles have been with atavistic people, you would think that at some point somebody would have done that and there would be more recorded instances. And the fact that they've done this one time, and this guy apparently got a bunch of predators and managed to survive hundreds of years, 700 years it says in here. I just can't believe that there's nobody else that's done that over the course of these series. And I think that's going to come into play in Xenogenesis, from what I understand, based on what Xenopedia tells me. But I would think, given that so much of the alien stories are about trying to exploit the aliens either as biological weapons or in the comic book specifically, the royal jelly being narcotic essentially, you would think that they would be doing the same thing with the predators. Frankly, not that people would argue this with me. I think the predators are easier to kill than the aliens. That's why I tend to favor aliens over predators. So why wouldn't you be hunting and exploiting predators like you do aliens in these stories? It's such a big part of alien story in the comics, and I would think that immortality would be far more valuable than any of these other things that they're wanting to exploit the aliens for. So why aren't we hunting predators for their hearts so that we can all be immortals? There are so many guys in our real world now who have devoted their billions of dollars to trying to find a fountain of youth so they can torment us forever instead of 80 to 100 years like they usually do. That would 100% be the number one thing all these guys would be doing if that were a thing that were justifiable in the cinematic lore.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I don't know if the predators are easier to kill so much as they are easier to kill without getting acid all over you, which, would negate the whole live forever purpose. The other thing is, one of the other things that we read, the second Batman Alien series, you had that woman who had, spoilers for anybody who hasn't read that or listened to the podcast, you had the woman who had been implanted with an embryo, and then her dry tuberculosis, I think, killed it, and then she had slowed aging. So it just seems like a thing he's on.
Right. Same guy each time, too.
Yeah.
Aliens vs. Predator #1 was the 128th highest selling book of June 1998 per Diamond Comic Distributors. The highest ranked Dark Horse comic of the month was Frank Miller's 300 #2 in 51st place, followed by Star Wars Shadows of the Empire Evolution #5 and Star Wars X-Wing Rogue Squadron Masquerade #4, leaving Eternal 4th ranked with 20,085 copies sold. It did beat Sergio Aragonés' Boogeyman #1, the Aliens Glass Corridor Special in 155th place, and then a batch of manga translations. Dark Horse's overall market share was 6%, less than half that of Image, but nearly twice that of Wizard Magazine's various publications. They were followed by Viz, Topps, Chaos, Fantagraphics, and Tohan.
Eternal is also where we saw the introduction of the concept that eating predator hearts could prolong human life, something that you would also revisit in Xenogenesis. Can you tell us about the origins of that particular story element?
Reading a lot of non-comic stuff, I think that science and reading science just feeds into it. I think I read something about sharks in the Arctic because they've got a different kind of system, and they worked out that some were like 500, 600 years old, and there were scientists going to try and work out some way of using that to in applications for modern science. I thought, well, they want the predator not just for the technology, but what can they yield, like with the aliens, what can they yield with their physiology? The guy found, by eating the predator's heart, it healed him and gave him a certain kind of longevity. And so as he got older, it wasn't just physically eating it, you could extract the chemicals and process it. And so it was that, again, the Cronenberg-y body horror kind of thing creeps in again. Utilization of physical resources of another species to extend your own. What we used to like asset strip whales for everything, bones and flesh. And so we would do the same thing with another species regardless. Aliens vs.
Predator Eternal #2 was released on July 22nd, 1998. Copy reads, Becca Shaw is a talented reporter. Her one flaw, she doesn't know when to quit. And when aliens appear in a Hong Kong-style city, it's a safe bet that her flaw may prove fatal. On field assignment in Africa, she was reporting on a political uprising, but her journalistic sense uncovered a strange trail of clues. Like a moth to a flame, Becca can't resist breaking the story of a lifetime. No more than predators can resist hunting the galaxy's deadliest killing machines. While trying to attract the predators, they're also continuing to work on the original Predator ship, supposedly. I'm under the impression this is the original Predator ship that they're still pulling stuff out of. And now they've happened upon a couple of alien eggs. And I would say that historically, you usually can find those pretty readily. Those are probably not going to be the things that sit around for 700 years waiting for you to find them. But they just stumble upon the aliens now, the alien eggs. And then throughout the second issue is his victims, the scientists who were looking into this stuff, having been impregnated, and then of course having the chest bursters come out. And that's another issue too, is like there's a lot of time spent going over stuff that we're already very well familiar with, like the incubation period. But he's experiencing it for the first time, despite his advanced age, and now he's trying to weaponize that as well. So that's how but it feels like, we're in the second issue before you really have anything happening with the aliens, and really all that happens in that second issue is a thing that everybody who's ever read an alien story already knows very well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it might be a required story beat, right? Where they implant embryos and burst out of people's chests. What a shock. I think they cover the whole, we didn't find the aliens' eggs until now by saying, Dr. Caricio says essentially, hey, we just broke the encryption and figured out how to open this door. The nice thing about that was it tells you why the Predator ship crashed. It's because they were being eaten by aliens.
I don't know if that's the case, though. I think they might have been transporting aliens, but if he would have found alien, like you see, there's that sequence where, so there's the chief mercenary, the blonde-haired Occidental, and he's leading him through his wall of trophies, and they're all trophies of Predator portions, Predator skulls, Predator masks. There's no alien stuff in there. So I think that maybe these guys just crashed for unrelated reasons, and they had a well-contained alien egg, because otherwise he'd have had pieces of that material and been using that as well.
Yeah, unless the acid blood, once they die, burns them up or something over time. Grasping at straws. You're probably right, because so the whole thing about hunting a xenomorph is part of the initiation for the adolescent growing into adult predators, right? So this could have been them transporting the eggs so that they can keep the initiation rites going.
I think it's less that I'm right and more that I'm bored, and I'm just nitpicking at this point, because I'm not coming at this as a thing where it's like, oh, here's a new original story that I can just let wash over me. It's like, here's me doing a thing that I've done 50 times now, and the basics are all in place. Aliens vs. Predator Eternal #2 was the 138th highest selling book for July 1998, flipping 10 slots. 304 Star Wars titles continued to best it, pushing Eternal to 6th place for Dark Horse. With 17,463 copies sold, the title lost about 2,000 readers. The top comic of the month overall was Michael Turner's Fathom #1, selling 257,087 copies.
But I guess I'm more curious about your reaction to it now more than anything. There was a pitch from two writers, James DeMonico and Kevin Fox, that sounded so much like an adaptation of Eternal. How cool would that have been from your perception, to see that adapted on the big screen?
Well, when you mentioned it to me, I kind of went, you what now? It's like, what? I'm finding this out 20 years later. I can wax lyrical now with, the hindsight of years, it would have been quite cool, but I don't know how it would have felt going to the cinema and seeing I don't know if we would have even got screen credit, because it was work for hire and whatnot. But it would have been great. I mean, where would my career have gone if they that had been the movie? It would have been so cool. But yeah, I mean, because it's licensed, I suppose, you don't have a say, and so they give it to a screenwriters or whatever to have a go. Or so you have to kind of be philosophical about it. But it would have been cool. It would have been cool. I would have really loved it. Would have been nice to get paid for it or whatever, but. Still, even so, part of me, the fanboy part of me was still gone, yeah, but they made a movie of your comic. It's like, okay. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of a double-edged sword, but it would have been cool. Come on, it would have been cool.
It would have been cool.
A big wedge of cash would have been nice, but it would have been cool as well.
Yeah, I've honestly never understood that some of the fans' aversion to the Earth setting. I think it's just how you do it, and your comic Eternal definitely did it right, and it showed that I think the concept can work if done in a certain way.
I think in the second day VP movie just didn't do it. It was almost like a slasher movie kind of thing. It's a small town, and I think that's the kind of thing that they didn't want. But if you just make the settings interesting, as like the aliens and the Predator, then I don't see why you can't.
See with the Alien series if they can pull it off with that one.
Well, hopefully. Is that full Netflix or Amazon? Who's it?
I think it's going to be Hulu, FX on Hulu, and it's Noah Hawley is the showrunner for that.
Yeah. I mean, because it's been the stuff that's coming out on TV seems to be a lot stronger. It's much better made. So fingers crossed. Touch wood, fingers crossed.
Well, we've got high hopes.
And a lot of elements of what you first introduced into Alien and Predator lore are still used and referenced today, particularly in the video games. The Kramer assault rifle is in Aliens Fireteam Elite, the recently released video game. The concept of predator blood or biology prolonging human life was both in Predator Concrete Jungle and Predator Hunting Grounds. So how does it feel knowing concept you conceived have pervaded in the lore after all this time?
Again, it was like, I did not know this until it was mentioned. But yeah, I mean, it's great to that you've done your little bit to add to the canon kind of thing. Your stuff is in there and it carries on past you kind of thing. Good enough as well that people do want to incorporate it. Yeah, I'm pleased. It's great. If it makes people happy when they're playing it and just think it's cool, then that's great.
Aliens vs. Predator, Eternal Number 3, was released on August 26, 1998. Copy reads, aliens loose in a futuristic city causing mayhem and bloodshed is one thing. When they are pursued by predators, the fiercest hunters in the galaxy, things quickly go from bad to worse. One of the people caught in the middle is Becca Shaw, devil-may-care journalist and all-around trouble magnet. The other is Noor, techno-baron with a dark past. Becca won't let anyone get in the way of her story. Noor won't let anything stand between him and the secrets of immortality that the predators hold. When these two clash, it might be the aliens and predators that run for cover. Frankly, trying to read this miniseries was difficult because my eyes kept rolling issue after issue over some of the nonsense that he's putting into these things. For instance, like it's supposed to be a future story, but the lady's still running around in late 90s fashions and she's communicating with people via beepers. You know? It's like, we had Star Trek by then. Go ahead and just give her a communicator or something so that it isn't quite so ridiculously dated. It's just me nitpicking for the most part. I've got nothing better to do at this point. So don't give me any credit that I don't deserve.
I'll happily look for credit that you deserve, Frank. And I do think we're benefiting from your greater experience at reading these, because to me, you talk about issues with the storytelling. This was a puzzle to solve. I honestly, it's like that's not supposed to be part of the enjoyment of this, is like deciphering a puzzle. But it's like it's not supposed to be that much of a mystery as just what's going on, but that kind of was what it became for me. Two things I will say about the fight. Major Cabot, who's the chief merc that we're talking about, shows that he has pretty good instincts when he's figuring out what the predators are doing. Of course, he's kind of been briefed on them, so he has an advantage. The security guys, the suited up security guys that look like Yakuza, they're completely surprised that there are bad guys that they're going to have trouble seeing. And I thought, well, that was kind of stupid of Lee, the big bad guy, to not brief his men and just assume that the predators will never come looking for him.
Yeah, it's weird because you'd think he would know better by that point, but there's also some indication that maybe he's never actually fought the predators, I'm wondering, because I think what might be happening is he might attract the predators so that they hopefully one of them gets killed in the midst of all the other stuff going on and they can just take the remains. I'm not sure he's ever really fought a predator before. I think it might just be that he's sort of a bird of, not a bird of prey, like a vulture. He's an eater of carrion, maybe.
I don't think he's fought them. I think that, but I think he knows how they operate. He's not sharing that information with everybody who needs to know. I mean, and honestly, it's a very toxic leadership. You'll know what I tell you. When I decide that you need to know, and if that gives you an advantage or a disadvantage when you're fighting them, well, that's okay because I can just throw more bodies at it.
Yeah, and also as I flip through the miniseries, there are a lot of trophies in a lot of places because in his house he's got multiple armors, firearms. He's got those thing that the lady finds. Okay, so she's the only survivor of the ambush that causes the civil war in the African nation that gets completely forgotten about after about a few pages into the second issue. The only real consequence of that to the story is that the journalist is discredited and nobody wants to hire her anymore, and she gets desperate because she's out of work. That's all the stuff that happens in Africa. All it does is have a bad impact on the white lady's experience. But when she does eventually get to the Vandal Savage's home, it's got all those kind of weapons. It's got the thing, the blade thing that she's using to try to hunt down the guy. And it turns out that she didn't have to hunt the guy down. He was actually testing her because he wants her to write his biography. So as this great journalist, she never actually found anything out that he didn't essentially hand to her. He protected her. He made sure that she got to where he wanted to be. And that's when the interview with the vampire comes in, where I'm the 700-year-old guy, and you're the person I've selected to do my biography. It's like, oh, here's another derivative thing. Great.
Yeah.
And I have to point out too, it's less, I don't know, you're reading it in the original miniseries, right?
Yeah.
In the collections, they make his skin tone less yellow, but his skin tone is very yellow for much of this miniseries. Not a good look either.
No, I mean, I kind of wrote it off because the coloring is a little wonky. So
everybody's a little jaundiced, is true.
Yeah. So I wasn't. It wasn't like reading a '60s comics, where Chop is like not a human flesh tone. That you react viscerally to that.
Yeah, I had to take a little time off, but I'm working on a Thunder Agent series of podcasts, which includes Undersea Agent, and the main bad guy for an Undersea Agent is full yellow peril dude. So it's like, oh wow, yeah, that's where we used to be. Okay, so. Aliens vs. Predator number 3 was the 142nd highest selling book for August 1998, slipping 4 slots. 303 Star Wars titles were above Eternal, so 5th place. With 16,581 copies sold, it lost a little under 1,000 readers issue to issue. The top comic of the month overall was Joe Madureira's Battle Chasers number 4, selling 143,545 copies. Dark Horse continues to be the 4th ranked publisher by metrics like dollar share, units sold, and titles in the top 300, but it's not even close to Image. With about 3 times Dark Horse's business, there are only 3 major publishers in North America, and Dark Horse ain't one of them.
Something I kind of noticed while reviewing these before the podcast was Gideon Lee using a Predator plasma caster on his shoulder. It's the first time I remember seeing that, but that was in the last Predator movie. The Predator.
Yeah.
Traeger had the plasma caster on his shoulder. I was like, did they take that from that old comic? But
well, so I think some of it is just like, it just seems like a really cool idea, and I kind of did it first.
Yeah.
So like an obviously cool idea. It's like, let's do this. It's like, okay. So.
Oh, he was smart enough to at least not get his head blown off, even if he was a bit too thirsty for Predator blood to let himself get killed in the end.
I love that he cheated the Predators as well at the end of that one.
Oh, I'm not an honorable man, and he has the little side thing that comes out of his armor. Yeah, that was a good bet.
Aliens vs. Predator Eternal number 4 was released on September 23rd, 1998. Copy reads, journalist Becca McBride and mystery man Gideon Lee finally come face to face, though not in the way you'd expect. But there's still a matter of aliens running around the sewers and subways. As Lee, Becca, and hired mercenary Cabot prepare for a final hunt, they know a band of predators is waiting in the shadows to take on whoever is left standing. This whole thing wraps up where she's supposed to be the guy's biographer, but it's like, okay, well, as part of my biography, I and you are going to suit up in our special predator-type suits, and we're going to go into the sewers hunting aliens because the predators are going to come after the aliens too, and that'll give us a chance to get to the predators. And meanwhile, she puts on this body armor that just happens to have nipples on it, and I'm just like, I'm done. I quit. I'm done with this miniseries at this point.
This is Schumacher Batman trauma that you're dealing with, right? So they should have known better from that.
The same year. Could well be. Yeah.
Having worked on so many stories for Dark Horse and seen your stories envisioned by many different artists and styles, which do you feel best suited your own writing in terms of artwork?
Ooh, that's right. I don't know. I like Will's because we did kind of like gothic-y body horror kind of, and so Will's kind of quite scratchy style really suited that. I don't know. I was happy with pretty much everybody who did the stuff. I mean, Alex, he was in his early days. Alex Maleev, when we were doing Eternal, was starting out, and I think he was also doing a job working on a video or something. And said, "Oh, I've been talking to this artist who's helping me." And the storyboard artist, I think, was Neil Adams. Turned out he was like famous comic artist, and so he gave him like pointers and things and stuff. And so after he started doing that job, you could see the change in the artwork style and the fluidity into it. So that was really quite interesting. But I mean, he did a cracking job on that. I've been pleased with everybody. I've not had an artist I would ever complain about on stuff like that. So I'm all good.
So as far as the art, she brought up the art. I've never been big on Alex Maleev. I actually like the art in this miniseries more than I like most of his stuff. The problem being is that most of his stuff to me looks like a photograph that's been run through a filter. I don't know if he's tracing or if he's just heavily reliant on photo reference for his stuff, but I've always found his work to be extremely stiff and inorganic. And I believe that here he is actually drawing the pages. I've never been confident in his stuff. He worked for a long time with Brian Michael Bendis. I was never confident he was actually drawing most of that stuff. I felt like he was doing some digital tomfoolery, right? The guy clearly was drawing comic book art. So I like this a bit better. It definitely has some 90s-isms to it. There's still that stiffness and awkwardness that's characterized in his work, but I actually like this better because, again, it looks like proper comic book drawings. They have short fallings, like he's really bad at action sequence. Things get extremely confusing every time the action picks up. I don't know what the hell's going on. And the guy also loves to just bathe things in black and have a few little details in white so you can barely figure out what's going on. I find that really tedious too, but it's mostly in the action sequences. And since so much of this miniseries is sort of a moody intrigue and such, espionage kind of thing, corporate espionage and such, I don't mind it as much as I could have. I've definitely seen worse looking miniseries from this guy.
Yeah, there's a point where the human big bad dies at the end, and I was just going over it before we started recording again, and I realized I don't really know who killed him. Like, I don't know, it looks like a predator killed him clearly, but is it the one that he just knocked down, or is it another? I don't know.
There was the one that he cut the arm got knocked off. Was it that one or was it another one? And it's just bodies especially in the last action sequence. It's just bodies from panel to panel until there's a slow attrition of bodies, and then there's one person left.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, everybody but the female reporter that you don't like and is a total scumbag survives. And the premise is that, he'd already advanced me $1 million. I gave half of that money to the cameraman that got killed in Africa, and I'll spend the rest to continue to investigate all this alien predator nonsense. So you got a really big to be continued at the end of this miniseries, and I don't think his character ever appears again, despite the writer continuing to work on this property.
Yeah, and I looked that up. You're the guy who knows sales figures, so I'm sure this will come out in the podcast.
Aliens vs. Predator Eternal #4 was the 142nd highest selling book of September 1998, slipping 4 slots. Buffy the Vampire Slayer #1 was Dark Horse's top title, ranked 28th with 61,383 copies sold, helped by an Art Adams main cover and 2 photo variants. 300, 3 Star Wars titles, the debut of the second volume of ongoing series for the Dark Horse heroine Ghost, and a new Terminator #1 followed. That left the final issue of Aliens vs. Predator Eternal in 8th place at Dark Horse, 147th overall, with 15,678 copies sold, losing a bit under 1,000 readers. The top comic of the month was Uncanny X-Men #361, featuring the return of Gambit, selling 138,138 copies for Marvel. Adjectiveless X-Men, Danger Girl, Spawn, and Battle Chasers filled out the top 5.
This did seem like a soft pilot for her, like they're trying to introduce her as the Incredible Hulk McGee character who's hunting the Predators and probably the aliens. And there would be a lot of story potential in that, but maybe just nobody liked it enough. And yeah, she's not super likable in and of herself, like you're saying. I did think the relationship between her and Major Cabot, who essentially, whether it was him or one of his men, murdered her cameraman who was her buddy, and then he becomes kind of protective of her, which she's uncomfortable about, but she's not going to turn down the protection. That was a little bit interesting. But then she's calling him out on the fact that he murdered Earl, and then he starts doing this villain-ish sophistry thing, rationalization, where he's like, I'm a murderer for hire, that's what I do, but you recklessly brought him into this dangerous situation, so it's really your fault. And she actually kind of buys that, and I lost some respect for her when she did. Not that she wasn't reckless with her life and Earl's, but they both have agency, they're both making their own decisions. Neither one of them is responsible for someone coming up and shooting him.
I love how you always come up with this, shucks, I don't really know the material that well, I'm not really that informed about this sort of thing, and then you'll bust out with a sophistry. It's like, okay, I think this guy's going to be underplaying himself a little bit. I think you you want to lower people's expectations, then you hit them with the left, Because it never fails that I think on everything I've recorded with you, there's been at least one instance where you go for the frickin' $10 word.
Well, hey, I'm better off underselling and over-delivering, right?
Yeah, I'm 100%. I agree with that. I'd much rather surprise you than have you dump a bunch of expectations on me. But it's like, but I have to bust you on it because it's like every single time you come up with some really advanced concept or a $10 word, I'm like, damn, bro.
It's still true that I don't know the material. I'm not
sure. Okay. Yeah. No. Exactly. Yeah. You've seen movies. You haven't read a ton of the comic books. You're doing me a solid by reading this, particularly this Ian Edginton stuff. Good God. I'm sorry. I owe you an apology. Probably some money as well.
That's cool. I can be the Ian Edginton guy when he becomes super popular in 5 years. It'll all pay off.
I do think, since you mentioned it though, I haven't crunched numbers on this one yet. I'm going to look at that on the back end. But my understanding is I think this sold reasonably well. I think that's part of the reason why they gave him Xenogenesis. And I believe that among the AVP community, it's a fairly well-liked miniseries. I think because it does come at the characters from a slightly different angle, it has a unique quality to it. There are other people who like Alex Maleev more than I do. So I think this one was reasonably well regarded. I watched a interview with AVP Galaxy featuring Ian Edginton, and I think they talked about how a lot of their people who were in that community had questions about the miniseries and dug it. And I think this is what gave him the props to move on to the next thing. So I don't think it was a matter of them scuttling the character. I think it just, he was working on a different thing and maybe was going to bring her later on if that had been successful. I think now got to think about it too. I think that Xenogenesis takes place in the Aliens time frame, where this is more in the Predator time frame. So there might have just been that gulf of years that they didn't want to have to deal with.
Yeah, and I mean that all makes sense. So I do like this, the globe-trotting adventurer with a leather satchel character. She's just overdone and almost a caricature of it. But if they throttled it back a little bit, she could have been a good protagonist again.
Well, it's like I read an article the other day where they were talking about how Joe Rogan loves Hunter S. Thompson, and Hunter S. Thompson would have despised Joe Rogan because Thompson was all about pushing against authoritarianism, pushing against lies and misinformation. And even though he was a junkie and he was kind of a scuzzy dude and he had his own issues, but he still was on a moral crusade ultimately to find a greater truth and to oppose a lot of these forces that manipulate the regular man's lives. And Rogan just completely is a utilitarian of those type of people. I think that this is the same kind of situation with this lady. I don't get the impression she's overly concerned about the truth. I think she's concerned about what gets her famous and what gets her attention and what keeps her at the top of the game. And she's willing to work with the bad guys because literally she takes the $1 million from Lestat, Highlander, whatever you want to call him, and she's going to write the book. She's going to write the book because that's going to be her ticket back to notoriety and to get her back in the game again. So she is the Joe Rogan in this situation where I think the writer thought that they were writing Hunter Thompson.
Okay, thank God. I thought I was going to be the Joe Rogan and she was going to be the Hunter Thompson. So this is much better.
Let's not.
Right, so
but if you start pitching ivermectin, we're going to cut this thing off. So don't. I put this out through Spotify, which is also where Joe Rogan comes from, but they will try to come after me if I monetize it. So no advertisements, please.
Don't worry. If I had a sponsorship deal, you'd know it by now. That's interesting because I think she becomes more of an idealistic truth teller at the end, or they're trying to pitch her as having had a bit of an arc, which would have made her a more interesting character if they decided to come back to her. But yeah, you're right. She's a little bit like the Vandal Savage character. She's not nearly so amoral as he is, but she is scrambling to try to get to the top of her lane.
I just realized this would have been a way better miniseries if it had ended with her eating one of the Predator hearts. If we'd actually seen her having a villain arc instead of a hero arc, that would have been a real, oh my God. And then she could have been in Xenogenesis. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, and then speaking of rationalization, it would have been interesting to see how she justified that to herself. But anyway, yeah, we're going to make Ian Edginton deep one way or the other. At the end, when Lee, the immortal character, or immortal-ish character, dies, I did appreciate the whole thing. If he challenges the Predator to a straight-up fight with blades, and the Predator is down for it, and then he pulls out a hidden gun and shoots him, and that was predictable. He's going to do some kind of betrayal, but I appreciated that it was true to the character. He has no honor, so that was nice.
Yeah, I agree. That was perfectly suited the character. You could see it coming, but it was one of those instances where you're like, okay, please pay off the setup, and they did. So no qualms about that one.
Yeah.
Our protagonist in Eternal, at the end of it kind of sets up like she's ready to do more investigative reporting on what's happening here. But I don't believe we ever saw another story with her. So is that something you were at one time planning, or do you think there's potential there to bring her back?
I'd love to. That's one of those things, those kind of like plot threads I threw out there, and it's like it's ready to be picked up as and when. I'd love to do that. I thought she was a really good character. I really like writing her, and so it's like you always hope that they might get picked up later on, but and that you get to do it.
Becca's also interesting in that she's not, she's tough and she's driven and all that, but unlike a lot of like the female leads that we get in the Alien and the AVP stories, she wasn't so physically inclined. She wasn't an action hero. She was a lot more figuring things out and stuff like that, and that makes her stand out quite a bit against the likes of Majiko and Ripley and stuff like that.
I didn't want it to be kind of that kind of strong female kind of cliche that was in that kind of universe. I wanted it to be where she would get a punch in the face and she would mess up, and she would ultimately figure things out, and work things out and save the day, but in her own inimicable kind of way. She wasn't Teflon. She had her faults, but she still came good at the end of the day. I liked it.
The Aliens vs. Predator Eternal trade paperback paperback, was released on September 8th, 1999, so about a year after the conclusion of the series. Copy reads, aliens loose in the Tokyo subways of the future is bad news. But when these monstrous beasts are pursued by predators, the fiercest hunters in the galaxy, bad quickly becomes worse. Caught in the middle is Becca Shaw, a reckless journalist on the trail of Gideon Soon Lee, a mysterious techno-billionaire who won't let anything stand between him and the secrets of immortality that the predators hold. When Becca and Gideon clash, it might be the aliens and the predators that run for cover. Soft cover, 88 pages, full color, $9.95, age range 16+. Among Diamond Comic distributors, August 1999, graphic novel sales to North American comic shops. The collection of Eternal ranked last of 25 listed titles in unit sales, 36th in dollars, with 1,691 copies sold. The top trades of the month were Star Wars Return of the Jedi manga Volume 3, with sales of 10,966 copies, followed by Preacher's Salvation, Fathom Collected Edition Volume 2, Pokemon Volume 1, Electric Tale of Pikachu, and Essential Uncanny X-Men, I believe Volume 1. Eternal was also collected in 2007's Aliens vs. Predator Omnibus Volume 1, and in 2020's Aliens vs. Predator, The Essential Comics Volume 2. Now comes the time where you have to pick a page of artwork.
Got it. So I picked a page for each issue. Is that appropriate, or have I gone too far?
No, you're good with each issue. We'll have alternates, but I will ask you to rank them by desirability.
Oh, wow. All right. So I'll come up with that as we go. So for the first issue, there were several good options. The first page, the splash page, was beautiful. And I think maybe if I had to write this down again, I might go back to that. So that's right up there. The page where the reporter first shows up in Gamibia was also pretty cool. It's a little like they're trying to pack all the stereotype into one shot or into one page. But I thought it was fairly well done. But the trophy room shot, just for those, which is page 13, I think, of the first issue, where Lee is showing Major Cabot, okay, here's what's really going on. I appreciated that one. Next one, do you want to call out yours, or do you want me to move on to the next one?
No, keep going.
All right. So next issue is really the last page. Doesn't have a predator or alien on it, or actually second to last page. And it's Becca in the airport with her spear tip around her neck as a pendant and a cross. Just noticed that. Didn't see that coming. The drawing of the airliner is really good. The airport scene is just an evocative image. Like, you know exactly where she is. It's someplace you've been before, and you can get the total vibe from the image. Number 2 is superior to number 1. So let's see what's next. Number 3 picked page 6, where the predator is sparring with a xenomorph. It's in the middle of a multi-page action sequence. And I agree with you about Alex Maleev on the action stuff, and it's hard to tell what's going on. But this is probably the clearest page. And you see the predator spearing the alien. It's got to be difficult names, right? Because they're both predators and they're both aliens. But you know what I mean. So spearing the xenomorph. And that was a good shot. I'm still liking the airport shot better, though. The last one, number 4, I picked page 18, which is McBride's Victory. Becca McBride, the reporter, where she pulls out some super high-tech gun and shoots the alien through the brain pan. But yeah, I'd still prefer to put the airport scene up on my wall. So the airport scene wins.
Okay, so again, my experience with the aliens material across the podcast, there's been a lot of instances where I said, I don't really want a page of art. I don't need a page of art. If I could build up credit from all those instances where I didn't take a page of art and allow myself to have one of the Glenn Fabry covers, I would absolutely want to cash that in for any of those 4 covers. The covers are the best thing about the miniseries easily. I've always loved Glenn Fabry. Give me one of those, please.
Yeah, because I asked Glenn if he wanted on Eternal if he'd come and do the covers for that, because I just thought he'd do a great job. Glenn Fabry, I think that cover of the trade is quite memorable. The reflection of the alien in the blades. Uh-huh. So yeah.
But since I myself have come up with the rule that you can't pick a cover, then you're going to put a gun in my head and say, pick a page. So what I'm going to say is probably any of the first few pages from the first issue, all the stuff with Lee's origin story. Particularly, I like the splash page because if it's old school comic art, which means the caption should be glued to the page, and you get like a little mini story all right there on that one first page. So ideally, I would take that one. If that one's already, I think you mentioned that one, so if that one's already taken, then a couple pages past where the actual ship is making impact, and we're slowly pushing in on Lee's face, and he's all jacked up, and he's got the blackened eye and such. I thought that was also a nice looking page, so that's one I'd be willing to take. And then finally, the final page of issue 2 with the aliens in the sewer. It's a nice close-up shot of a couple of drones. His style works well for those characters. So they're all gnarly and gross and wet. So I would take that page as well.
Yeah, that's a good page too. It's just, it goes to that thing of like too much black. But you're right. It is a good page. Regarding those first few pages of issue 1, that's almost the intro to a better series, if that makes sense.
Well, it doesn't even look like Alex Maleev art either. So it's one of those things where if I say, I don't really like his stuff, but I'll take those pages because those are the pages that don't look like Alex Maleev pages. They kind of remind me a little of Mel Ruby. So that's part of it. It's sort of a rejection of what Alex Maleev came by driving this earlier stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think that's it, huh?
What about 4?
Oh, no. I've picked my pages. I'm not going any deeper than that. Especially the more they feature the mercenaries and the dumb 90s bad girl nipple armor and all that kind of stuff. Like, nah, I'm out. I tap out. You put a gun in my face. You said, pick a page from the miniseries. I picked 3 pages for the miniseries, cutting it off.
All right, cool.
I'm good with that. So anything else with this one?
This is another situation where I would not have read this on my own, but now I'm glad I did, mainly because of the opportunity to pick it apart and discuss it, which is more fun than it would have been just to read it for entertainment, weirdly.
Well, and I'm glad you enjoyed it because then I can continue to exploit you and make you read the stuff for my podcasting purposes. I'm going to sling my arm around your neck and just help you drag me along the rest of the way.
You say exploit me, but I'm not the one who does the editing, so I don't know who's being exploited.
Yeah, you add to your podcasting resume, so there's quid pro quo.
Yep.
You'd like to share any anecdote or thought that we just haven't given you the opportunity to put across with any of our questions?
It's all been so long ago. It's kind of like trying, but it's just been fun. It's just been a blast. That's the main thing. I had a really good time doing stuff. To be asked to do this stuff.
Repeatedly.
Yeah, you just go, that's so good. You're really fortunate, you're really lucky. And so never kind of took it for granted and just really enjoyed it. And so, hopefully after I'm long gone, people still, pick up the Eternal or whatever and go, this is a really cool read.
I will.
Thank you.
I'm going to be still alive.
God bless you, Dad. But yeah, no, it's just been great. It's not very often you get to work on things like this. And so it's been great. Can't complain. Even the stuff that have been with problematic and the Xenogenesis thing at the end, I'd still I'd still do it again if I got offered it because it's just great toys to play with. And that's the thing. I've grown up with this stuff. I love science fiction and horror and fantasy. It's I was one of those kids at school. You know what I mean?
After our recording session, Captain Entropy reached out to note, just occurred to me about the pager thing. One-way pagers still exist because they don't emit, and are therefore great for security. It's a comms black hole that can't easily be tracked. So that might be why McBride would have one. Of course, it is possible to adulterate the supply chain and plant explosives inside them. Israel, Hezbollah. I bring this up to rationalize McBride's use of the pager to receive messages from the Otaku Lazarus in the story. Between the Pages blog. Billy Hines, Comics Enabler, Birdhouse Blog Redux, Captain Entropy, who added, I'm catching up on some of the excellent podcasts advertised in this channel, and finally listened to this one from the end of January, referring to the Aliens Omnibus episode. I really enjoyed it. Del Dracula and the Irredeemable Shag did well, yes, even Shag. And Diablo Frank was a great host and producer as well. It included discussion of Gray Morrow as an Aliens artist, music references in Aliens comics, and fan reactions and criticism of Aliens comics, from a creator interview excerpt. And Shag says Superman vs. Aliens was really enjoyable and better than he expected. My wife even read it. Chaz S00, Chris Dunford, Chris Lydon, The Comic Crush, Dave's Comic Heroes blog, Del Dracula, who also do a cartoon mocking the Bo Smith cowboy story, but you have to be on Blue Sky to see it. Derek W.C., Ed Moore, Imetin Alama, The Exalted Bride, Gulf of Mexico, Hal Kolbeck, History of Comics on Film, Hicks, Into the Weird, Irredeemable Shag, Jamie Geha, Keith G. Baker, King Dinosaur, Kirk Spencer, Secretary of Comic Books, Queenie Todd, Martin Kessler, Michael, Monsignor Lamort, Monster Cowboys, Nina, Professor Boomer, Professor Frenzy, Rayrod 52, Rays Gamma, Relatively Geeky Podcast Network, Twisted Sword, Unpronounceable Wink, and William Voyage.
This has been a Rolled Spine podcast. All audio samples are believed covered under fair use laws. No copyright infringement is intended.
Coming in May, Dark Horse presents Aliens Apocalypse, The Destroying Angels. With guest Del Dracula.